Hey guys, welcome back to Alpha Talk Finance. What we're going to talk about today is nothing short of explosive. You know how sometimes you hear a piece of news and your first reaction is, wait, what? That's insane. Well, this is one of those stories, and it is not just some headline, it could directly shake the core of America's financial system. And even impact you, me, and how much money in our wallets is really worth. So what happened? Recently, Trump went after one of the Federal Reserve's board members, Lisa Cook. He publicly said she shouldn't stay at the Fed and that he wants to fire her. Now, when you hear that, some of you might think, well, the president has huge power, right? Firing someone should be easy. But nope, it's not that simple, because Cook isn't just some random official. She's a Fed governor, and the Fed isn't like any other agency. It's basically the heart of the US economy. The Fed controls interest rates, inflation, jobs, the stock market, housing, even the dollar's position in the world, and the most important part. The Fed is supposed to be independent. It's not supposed to take direct orders from the president. Now let me throw this question to you guys. Do you think a president should be able to fire a Fed governor just like that? Drop a yes or a no in the comments. A lot of people might instinctively say, of course, he's the president. But the truth is, it's not that straightforward. Why? Because the Fed's independence is baked into the system. Once a governor is appointed, they serve a fixed term. It's not like the president can just snap his fingers and kick them out. But Trump, as always, doesn't play by the usual rules. He said he's going to fire Cook, and guess what? Cook didn't back down. She actually took Trump to court. That's right, a sitting Fed governor suing the president, and her argument that this move is unprecedented and illegal. In other words, the president has no right to mess with the Fed like that. It is an attack on the very system itself. Now, this isn't just some workplace drama. This is a clash of institutions. Presidential political power versus Federal Reserve independence. Think about how dramatic this is. On one side, you've got Trump. Everyone knows his style, aggressive, doesn't like obstacles, and he thinks the economy should move according to his vision, with the Fed playing along. On the other side, you've got Cook standing up for the Fed's independence. She's basically saying, no, Mr. President, this is a line you don't cross. And here's the big question: if Trump really could fire her, then what's to stop a president from saying, I want rates up or I want rates down, whenever it suits their political goals? Would the Fed even be independent anymore? And if the courts side with Cook, does that mean the president's power over the economy just hit a wall? This isn't about one person's job. This is about the foundation of the US financial system. Now picture this. What if the Fed really became just the president is yes man? Say a president wanted to juice the economy before an election, he could push the Fed to slash rates and flood the market with cheap money. In the short term, sure, stocks rally, jobs look great, people cheer. But then the long-term damage kicks in. Runaway inflation, a weaker dollar, and suddenly the cash in your wallet buys less and less. Scary, right? That's why the Fed must be independent. Its job is to be the bad cop, to hit the brakes when everyone else just wants to floor the gas pedal. So why is Trump doing this? His motives are pretty clear. If you remember, even during his presidency, he constantly blasted the Fed on Twitter, complaining that rates were too high, accusing them of holding back growth. To him, the Fed was like this immovable wall blocking his economic agenda. And Trump's all about control. He doesn't like institutions that don't listen. So now, by targeting Cook, what he's really doing is taking a swing at the Fed's independence itself. And here's another question for you guys. Who should have the final say in shaping the economy, the president or the central bank? Drop president or Fed in the comments. It's honestly one of the toughest debates in economics. On the one hand, the president is elected by the people and represents the voters, so shouldn't he have the power to drive economic policy? But on the other hand, when politicians get too much control, decisions often become short-sighted, focused only on winning the next election, not on long-term stability. It's like letting the coach decide the referee's calls. Would the game still be fair? That's why America, from the very beginning, designed the system so the Fed stays independent. Back to Lisa Cook. Why does she have the guts to go head-to-head with Trump? First, because the law's on her side. The Fed governor's term is fixed, and presidents can't just fire them without cause, otherwise the whole system collapses. Second, for her, this is about defending not just her position, but the Fed's integrity. If she backed down, it wouldn't just weaken her personally, it would shatter the credibility of the Fed itself. And of course, the markets freaked out the moment this news broke, because what do investors hate the most? Uncertainty. And suddenly, you've got a president openly challenging the Fed's independence. For Wall Street, that's like pulling the referee off the court in the middle of the game. Stocks wobbled, the dollar fluctuated, the bond market shook, and the big fear is obvious. If the Fed really turns into a political tool, will global investors still trust US monetary policy? Will they still trust the dollar? So at this point, we've really got to talk about just how important the Federal Reserve actually is. Some of you may have heard the term, but maybe haven't thought about it deeply. In simple terms, the Fed is basically America's central bank. Its main job is to control interest rates, manage the money supply, and keep the financial system stable. For example, if you take out a mortgage, guess what? The interest rate you pay is largely determined by the Fed. When the Fed hikes rates, your mortgage costs go up and your monthly payments get heavier. When they cut rates, borrowing gets cheaper and you get some relief. Same thing with inflation. The Fed uses interest rates and monetary policy to keep prices from spiraling out of control. If they fail, prices can skyrocket. And suddenly just buying groceries or gas becomes painful. But here's the bigger picture. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. That means the Fed's decisions don't just impact Americans. They ripple across Asia, Europe, Africa, basically everywhere that interacts with the dollar. And because of that, the Fed must remain independent. If it ever looked like just another political tool, global trust in the dollar could collapse. Now think about this. What if a president really could fire Fed governors at will? How do you think the rest of the world would react? They'd probably say, so the US central bank is just a political puppet now? And if that happens, the credibility of the dollar takes a hit. Could that accelerate de-dollarization around the globe? That's a very real risk. Let's take a quick look at history. Trump isn't the first president to clash with the Fed. Nixon famously pressured the Fed back in the 1970s. And what happened? Short term, the economy looked good, but the end result was stagflation, high inflation combined with stagnant growth. Reagan also had his own friction with the Fed, but overall, US presidents have respected a bottom line. The president cannot directly control the Fed. Trump's move here pushes that tension to the extreme. And this isn't just abstract theory, the market is already showing the fallout. Bond investors are suddenly worried about inflation spiraling out of control. Stock traders are asking, will the Fed still act independently, or will it just bow to political pressure? If confidence in the Fed fades, global investors may dump US assets and look for alternatives. That's dangerous for America because the dollar's dominance is built on trust. So what does this mean for everyday people like us? Honestly, it's pretty simple. Anything that weakens Fed independence eventually lands in our wallets. If the Fed is forced to cut rates just to serve political needs, yeah, your mortgage might get cheaper in the short run, but prices at the grocery store will shoot up fast. Credit card interest rates will swing, and even your paycheck could feel the squeeze, because when inflation spikes, companies' costs rise and hiring slows. Let me throw this back to you. Which would you worry about more, high mortgage payments or runaway inflation at the supermarket? Drop mortgage or inflation in the comments. I want to see which one stresses people out the most. That's the tough balance the Fed is always trying to strike. Now let's dig deeper. A lot of you are probably wondering, why is Cook the target here? Why not someone else? Well, there's a real reason behind it. Lisa Cook was nominated by President Biden. She's a respected economics professor, and her focus tends to be more on labor markets and diversity. Her approach leans toward balanced, socially inclusive policy, but that clashes hard with Trump's philosophy of growth first, markets first. In his eyes, she represents the kind of voice that slows him down. If he replaces her, he gets more control over Fed policy. So here's the real question. If Trump can actually sway the Fed, will the US economy start running entirely on his terms? Think about Trump's economic mindset. It is straightforward. I want the economy to look good right now. I want the markets up. I want jobs strong. Why? Because those numbers win votes. Long-term problems? That's for the next guy to deal with. Here's a scenario to make it real. Imagine the Fed caves and slashes interest rates under Trump's pressure. In the short run, the stock market goes crazy. Your 401k and brokerage accounts are glowing green. Housing prices shoot higher because mortgages are cheap and everyone feels rich. Sounds great, right? But then, here comes the pain. inflation spikes. Your grocery bill explodes, milk jumps from $3 to $5, eggs from $2 to $4, gas prices soar, wages don't rise nearly as fast, so your cost of living outpaces your income. Suddenly, even though your investment account looks fat, your daily life feels crushing. That's the classic trade-off: short-term boom, long-term bust, doesn't this all kind of feel like using a credit card? Swiping it feels great, you're spending freely, living large, but then the bill shows up, and with the interest piling on, suddenly you realize you've dug yourself into a hole. If the Fed really turns into just a tool of the president, the US economy could end up in the exact same trap: short-term pleasure, long-term pain. But here's the real kicker: can America actually afford this bill? The US national debt has already blown past $34 trillion. Every single year, Washington pays out hundreds of billions just in interest. If they keep printing money and slashing rates with no breaks, eventually the government may not even be able to cover the interest payments. That's a ticking time bomb. That's why Lisa Cook's pushback is such a big deal. She's not just defending her own seat, she's defending the independence of the Federal Reserve. Her lawsuit is basically saying loud and clear, the president can't do this. If he does, the entire system falls apart. No matter how the courts rule, this moment is going to leave its mark on history. Because at the core, it is about one of America's founding principles: separation of powers and checks and balances. The Fed's independence is part of that system. And let's talk about the market's reaction. Financial markets are like a cat's whiskers, ultra-sensitive. The second this news hit, stocks swung, the dollar index wobbled, and treasury yields jumped around. What are investors really afraid of? Uncertainty. If the Fed loses its independence, monetary policy becomes completely unpredictable. Normally, traders can make reasonable forecasts based on inflation or jobs data, but if policy shifts on the whim of one politician, forget it. That uncertainty raises risk premiums, pushes money towards safe havens like gold or the Swiss franc, and could even speed up the global trend toward de-dollarization. And that raises a question I want to throw to you. How long do you think the dollar's dominance can really last? 5 years? 10 years? 20? Drop a number in the comments. There's no clear answer, but one thing is obvious: if America undermines the Fed's independence, the dollar's foundation gets weaker. The dollar isn't the global currency because of US military power or just because the US economy is big. It's because the dollar is backed by a stable, trusted system. As long as the world believes Washington won't manipulate money at will, they'll keep holding dollar assets. But the moment they see the Fed bowing to politics, that trust collapses. Now let's imagine what happens if investors actually start dumping dollar assets. US bond yields would spike, which means borrowing costs for the government shoot up. Stocks could take a hit too, as money flees the US. The biggest pain, though, would fall on everyday Americans. Imports would get more expensive across the board. Your iPhone, your gas, your clothes, everything costs more. That's when people would really feel what I call the cost of lost trust. And here's the twist: some people actually support Trump's push. Why? Because they see the Fed as too independent, an out-of-touch elite institution with no democratic accountability. They argue that when the Fed hikes rates, it crushes ordinary people with higher mortgage payments and credit card debt. So in their eyes, presidential intervention is about helping the people and boosting growth. Sounds appealing, right? But here's the problem. It ignores the long-term damage, short-term comfort, long-term collapse. And who pays the price in the end? Regular folks, always. At this point, I want to pull you into the conversation. Do you think the Fed is too independent, or is it independent just enough? Drop to independent or just write in the comments. This debate has been going on in the US for decades. A lot of people argue that the Fed holds enormous power without enough democratic oversight. But others believe that's exactly what keeps it safe from short-term political meddling. Now, back to this controversy. How will the courts rule? That's the big suspense. In theory, Cook has a strong legal case. The law clearly says Fed governors serve fixed terms and the president can't just fire them. But let's be real, US courts aren't always immune from political winds. If the judges lean toward Trump, it could set a dangerous precedent. If they side with Cook, it would reaffirm the Fed's independence. Either way, this case is heading straight into the history books and will be studied by scholars for years. So what should regular people do? The truth is, no matter how politics play out, the markets will react first. That means as investors or just as families managing their money, you've got to be prepared for bigger swings in the years ahead. Diversify your portfolio. Don't put all your eggs in US stocks. Consider hedging with inflation-resistant assets like commodities, gold, or even foreign markets. And in your household finances, be cautious with leverage. Don't assume interest rates will always stay low. They could spike at any time. Plan your mortgage wisely. Here's another quick question. Do you think rates are going up or down next year? Type up or down in the comments. This is one of the hottest debates on Wall Street right now. The Fed is stuck between two fires. On one side, inflation still hasn't fully cooled, and on the other, the economy can't be left to overheat. Add political pressure into the mix, and the challenge only gets harder. So rate decisions may end up depending as much on politics as on economic data. And here is the big takeaway. Don't assume these power struggles in Washington are far away from your life. They connect directly to your mortgage payments, grocery bills, wages, and investment returns. The Fed's independence or lack of it shows up in your daily budget. Institutions might sound abstract, but their impact is painfully real. Which is why we can't just watch this like a spectator sport. We need to understand the logic behind the headlines, so we can prepare before the storm hits. So let me throw it back to you. Do you support Trump's challenge to the Fed? Do you think it'll bring positive change, or is it setting up even bigger risks? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. This is a huge topic, and it's worth a real conversation.